Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
For more than 20 years now on this program, we have been careful, very careful, not to play favorites. It is important not just to seem, but to actually be fair and equitable. But just this once, we will make a personal exception. Welcome again to the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and we want to express our genuine pleasure that one of our own extended family, as it is here on CBR, and arguably a better moderator than I, has been appointed by North Carolina's newly minted Governor McCrory to the post of Secretary of Commerce. Our sincere happy returns and well wishes to Sharon Decker, someone who is intelligent, measured, compassionate, and intuitive. And our prediction is she will serve the old North State and its citizens well. So, on with the program. In a few moments, Lew Ebert from North Carolina Chamber, Mark Farris of the South Carolina Economic Development Machine, and later on, trucking CEO David Congdon.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, health care, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising health care costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded January 11th, 2013. On this week's program, Lew Ebert of the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce, Mark Farris of York County's Economic Development Board, and special guest David Congdon, President and CEO of Old Dominion Freight Line, Inc. Now, Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program. Lew, welcome back. Good to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Mark, always nice to see you show up.
Thank you, Chris.
And I mean that in a good way.
I appreciate that.
Happy New Year. We're a little bit far into it, but it's still fair to say that. Lew, North Carolina has, since Reconstruction, first time, and I know you've heard this probably ad nauseum, but first time that the Republicans are running the show in North Carolina. It is generally thought that the Republicans will tend to be more business friendly. You are where the rubber meets the road here in policy in North Carolina. Do you get the sense that the Republicans, and not just Tillis and Berger, but now also Pat McCrory, are these guys truly open to a much more friendly business atmosphere?
Absolutely. I think the best indicator of what I think 2013 might look like is if you go back and look at 2011 and 2012. We've had amazing success at the General Assembly with pro-business legislators at the helm and pro-business majorities, supermajorities, passing issues like workers' comp, tort reform, medical malpractice reform, reg reform, lowering taxes, all happened in a 2-year span. Now, many of these issues were vetoed, but they were all overridden with Republican and Democrat support. So I think that's a precursor of what you can see a Governor McCrory really focused on, which is really the #1 challenge as we look, back over the last 2 years and ahead over the next 2 years. North Carolina has a job creation problem. And I think you have those folks coming to work from day one realizing that's the #1 challenge, that's the #1 problem. And I think, Chris, they bring a lot more urgency to that task. So we're not just excited about their sense of pro-business approach to those issues, but I think it's an unrelenting focus on the need to create more jobs.
Is there any sense that there could be I don't know how to quite phrase it, but I think you're going to understand that now that the Republicans do have full control, can they overthink it? Can they overshoot that control and try to get some things in place that they've wanted to get in place for years or decades?
I think the environment we find ourselves in with one of the higher unemployment rates in the country and one of the toughest economies that's growing more slowly than most states is, they know that's where the focus is. we got to get this economy growing. We got to create more jobs. And I know, talking with them a lot, that's all they think about. So I think that's the laser focus. There may be other issues that come up, and certainly there will be, but the things that they think about day in and day out are the things that effectively need this state to create twice as many jobs as we've been creating. So we need to create 100,000 jobs a year. We're only creating about 50. So that's really where the rubber, as you've indicated earlier, meets the road. You know, we're putting half as many people back to work every year as we need to.
Yeah. Mark, let's go to you now. Stick with politics just for a second. Jim DeMint is gone. Tim Scott is the new junior senator from South Carolina. Is this a good day, other than, the most obvious that Scott is the first black senator from South Carolina now? Is there something to Tim Scott and his low country experience that he is going to bring now to the state?
I think absolutely. Obviously, if you think about South Carolina and changing and the diversity that's occurred in our state in the last 20 decades, it's a clear indication that an African American from the Republican Party is now one of our state senators, and I think it points to the fact that we're continuing that diversity in South Carolina.
Does let's forget about the fact he's African American. Let's talk about the fact that there's been a Tea Party influence in South Carolina, and that's rubbed some of the not so conservative Republicans a little bit wrong. So you've got a governor who has been influenced by Tea Party. You've got now Senator Scott that does have a Tea Party connection. Is this still a challenge in a state of South Carolina that tends to be more moderate and not so far on the right, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure. The change in the Republican Party has been pretty substantial. We've seen it at the local level, obviously, in terms of the Tea Party influence. But I think it still is. I think it still is significant that he's there.
Federal sequestration is one of these terms now that we're going to hear also coming out of the fiscal cliff debate. You know, these terms, we heard fiscal cliff, and now we're going to hear what's after fiscal cliff. Federal sequestration, one of those things in federal sequestration has to do with cuts in the Pentagon, cuts in defense. Lou, that's got to be a challenge for North Carolina, considering how many military people we have. What is the risk and what's the worry?
Well, I think the big concern, and we've had this study that we've had access to through the National Association of Manufacturers, it shows that sequestration as it was currently configured would cost North Carolina about 35,000 jobs. And you're right, it's not just the military jobs, Chris, but it's all the suppliers and vendors, it's all the related manufacturing entities and service providers that support the military. But it has, again, a big impact on a state where if we're producing 50,000 new jobs a year, and that's half what we ought to, the thought of losing 35,000 jobs over time certainly is a daunting concern, and in many of these cases in communities that can ill afford to lose those kind of jobs.
Can Raleigh do something about this, or is this just completely driven by federal dollars?
Well, I think that's driven by federal dollars, but I think coming back to your earlier question with the new governor and leadership in the House and the Senate, I think you're going to find them a lot more laser focused on, in the face of some challenges from the federal government, and there's certainly a long list of what some people refer to as government-induced uncertainty coming out of Washington. I think what states are realizing is, and I think North Carolina is a great example, I mean, things are getting done in the states that can have a positive impact on the business climate that don't require action out of Washington. And I think we've been a model in the last 2 years of getting good things done to help business. So I think we go back to what are the things, to your point, we can be doing right now in Raleigh to make an impact. I think you're going to find a lot more focus on other things that affect the cost of a job. The big issue we're focused on right now is our unemployment insurance system. Owes about $2.8 billion. And that's clearly the first thing on the list for the new governor and the legislature when they begin work in about 2 weeks.
You know, since you mentioned that unemployment insurance, or as many people call the UI liability now that's closing in on $3 billion, Mark, and I'm going to get to you in just a second. What kind of wind is that going to take out of North Carolina sales? And especially, Lou, when you talk about the jobs issue, that North Carolina is creating jobs at half of what they need to. So how much further back does that put the Tar Heel state? Well,
it puts us in a tough spot, Chris, because we haven't taken the proactive steps that most states have in America. We have the third highest UI debt, just behind New York and California. So we've really stepped in it from a debt standpoint, and basically that debt's created by benefit payout exceeding taxes paid. So from our standpoint, we got to quickly get real serious about how do we fix that system, because each year we don't fix it, it's about a $500 million impact. So effectively what we're saying to employers is by not fixing this system, every year we're going to make a job cost more. And that's exactly what the opposite message we need to be delivering. We got to deal with that jobs tax in a way that's very predictable and stable and balanced. Other states have done it, and we're excited. We think this new legislature, new governor, are going to step up and handle this issue very quickly.
We didn't even get to talk about tax reform, which is one of the big items on their thing. Mark, just very quickly, we go back to the cuts in DOD and defense, in which includes bases like Fort Jackson could be at risk, Sumter could be at risk. You could even say Savannah River site here among some of the influence around the Charleston port. How much concern is there in the Palmetto State about this federal sequestration?
I think there is concern. Obviously, we have a significant military presence. The base closure committee a couple of years ago cut back some facilities in South Carolina, and that was impactful, especially in the Charleston area. But one of the things to consider, Chris, I think, is the fact that we are targeting defense-related industries in both North and South Carolina. And the sequestration could have an impact on their business model, and as a result could impact the number of jobs that we could ultimately recruit.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, Mark, but so as an economic developer, does this put at risk attracting more jobs, or is that exactly the bridge we need to get? Are these companies the bridge we need to get to replace those cuts?
Certainly, if you think about especially the airline industry,
yeah.
Boeing, and some of the other companies, Spirit Airlines, Honda Jet, that's a targeted industry sector for us, but an important part of that is the military work that they do. So if sequestration occurs, then obviously you have the potential of less jobs being available for expansion in those facilities, and that directly impacts what we can do in both states.
Yeah, okay. Guys, we're out of time, at least for the first part. Never a dull moment for us in the Carolinas. I think it's probably a fair way to say it. Next week on this program, his name is Stephen Weehee. He is the Chief Executive Officer of a company called SciQuest. They are a vendor, a high-tech vendor of software. They have been on this program before, and the CEO, Weehee, will be back. Fred Carter, Dr. Fred Carter from Francis Marion University will be here in 2 weeks. And then the state of nonprofits, especially coming out of all of the fiscal cliff debate and the target of those that give many dollars to philanthropy. We will talk about the trickle-down effect in the non-for-profit in about 3 weeks. For many years now, a key debate in Raleigh, in Columbia, in Washington has been this critical issue specific to infrastructure and transportation. And it's so much more than repairing roads, bridges, fixing potholes. It is much more strategic in nature. Joining us now is someone who uses and depends on the arteries that handle most of our surface traffic and shipments. Old Dominion Freight Line President and Chief Executive Officer David Congdon. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you here. So, David, when we talk about infrastructure on this program, we're about 1 degree removed. When you talk about infrastructure and transportation, you're in the weeds of it. So, how challenging is the infrastructure and the transportation model or plan that North Carolina has? And how do you see this unwinding, or how do you see planning this going forward?
Well, obviously, as we're a nationwide less than truckload motor carrier, and being in the trucking business, the infrastructure is obviously critical to us. North Carolina has been known as the good roads state for forever, and we are really truly blessed with a great highway system in the state. But as the state is growing, we have to be very mindful of congestion and elimination of bottlenecks, so that the trucks can move freely throughout the state. And I think that should be a priority of the administration and the new administration in Raleigh.
Do you get the sense that they hear that? Do you think is there a new day in Raleigh?
We hope so. We certainly have a new governor and a new administration, and I do believe that they will listen to us and listen to the needs of the state.
One more question, Lew, and I'll give you a chance to jump in here. If you were king for a day and you could direct the governor and the legislature what to do, and they would do it, what would you tell them to fix about transportation?
Well, one of my key issues is not just a state issue, but it's one of a national concern, and that is the fact that the industry hauls roughly 2/3 of all of the freight tonnage across the United States, and that is projected to grow to greater than 70%. And as the population is growing and demand for services are growing, we have to put money into the infrastructure. Highway infrastructure, both fixing the potholes and maintaining, is grossly underfunded. The needs for infrastructure spending are nearly 3 times the amount of funding that's actually been available. So if I were king, I would come up with a way to increase funding, and for the trucking industry, we support the increase in the fuel taxes because that's the most efficient mechanism for funding the highways.
You know, I guess, David, as a company that does business all around the country, if you had to look at all the states that you do business in, is there one state or 2 states that have really kind of figured out, if you're able to, back to Chris's point, be king for a day and say, not only here's what I would do, but what states do you kind of point to in your organization that have kind of figured out that right mix of infrastructure demands and needs and manage the cost in an effective way?
It's a little hard to say because we rely so much on the interstate highway network. That's where the majority of our trucks run. But one of the states in particular that has put a focus on part of their infrastructure is Florida, where they are putting a lot of emphasis on their ports to try to capture the imports and also deepen their ports. You hear a lot about that. You're working on that in South Carolina, competing also with Savannah on their deepening. But it appears that Florida has a concerted effort and are putting the financial resources, especially in Miami. I think the investment is $150 some million in deepening their port and putting in the highway infrastructure required to be able to get the containers and the trucks into and out of the port.
David, a lot of companies that we work with in both North and South Carolina look for the presence of intermodal facilities, and a lot of communities have developed those in the last couple of years. How significant is that for your business?
Well, intermodal is not terribly significant for our business. We are primarily a trucking company. We're in the less than truckload segment of the industry, and due to the fact that 25% of our freight is next day, between city pairs, you can't put that on a train and do it and provide the service. And then the next segment would be the 2 and 3 day freight. I mean, third day and less for us is 80% of all the shipments that we handle, and it's hard to do intermodal when you're in the less than truckload business. But intermodal, as in the national scheme of things, is right at 2% of all the tonnage moved in the United States. And intermodal is a very important segment of the freight transportation business, but it still is relatively small compared to trucking.
To remain competitive, David, I know you all are looking very hard at this issue of adding a third trailer on the back of that tractor. Is this about a legislative issue?
Well, let me
Is
just.
Is this about a safety issue? I'm sorry.
Yeah, on the talking about triple trailers, Old Dominion operates twin 28-foot trailers nationwide in between our city pairs, and then there are 16 states where we operate a third trailer, and those are primarily out in the West and the Northwest. But in 1991, there was a law called ISTEA, Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, that put a freeze on the expanded use of longer combination vehicles, which is what we're talking about here. And we operate the triple trailers in those western states, and there's several things that are, and I'm an advocate, and we are an advocate for expanded use of longer combination vehicles, zeroing in on specific traffic lanes where they make sense and where safety is not a factor. I'd like to just share with you this chart. You can see the 10 cross-country routes that we have studied in our company, that if we could operate a third trailer in just these 10 routes, we would save nearly 3 million gallons of diesel fuel a year. It would cut out 62,000 tons of carbon, nearly 10% fewer trucks on the road in these along these routes, and that's just one LTL fleet. There are 30 more of us out there that are handling all of the less than truckload business, and most of the LTL companies operate a twin trailer type network.
But don't your statistics there fly in counter to what the act was called to begin with, the Efficiency Act? I mean, why?
Well, let me reiterate. There's several reasons why this is a good thing. Number one is safety. That is the number one priority of our industry is safety. And in our fleet, we have measured the accident frequency ratio of our double fleet versus the 16 states where we run triples. And our frequency ratio is 13% less on a mileage basis, and considering that you have a third trailer and 50% more freight, it's 20% better accident frequency ratio on a ton-mile basis. Secondly, your fuel consumed per ton is 20 to 25% less with a triple operation. It reduces trips, which reduces congestion. For every 6 trailers you would put on the road, you would do it with 2 tractors as opposed to 3. So the actual impact on the highway and the infrastructure is less. And in the end, if our cost of doing business is less, there's something in it for the shippers and the consumers. The clothes on your back, the chairs we sit in, the coffee we're drinking here, all moves by truck and is impacted by the cost of transportation. So as we are dealing with a continued growth in the population of the United States, 2.6 million more people per year, the demand for services is going to rise. And if we don't do something, one, about transportation infrastructure and funding it, and 2, about trucking productivity, the cost of the goods that we consume, the clothes on our back, and the food that we eat is going to go up, continue to rise.
We have about 2 minutes left.
You know, your point, David, about growth is a good one. I mean, people project by 2030, 5 million people will move to our state on top of the 9.5 million that live here already. And as a state that is, I think we maintain the most number of roads anywhere in the country. So I think we have a unique challenge here because we've bit off a big chunk of infrastructure that's now really controlled at the state level. When you're with national leaders, and certainly you're among the largest in the country as a transportation company, what are some of the big issues that we could expect coming out of Washington that might help us address some of the just significant billions and billions of dollars in need, so we can approach this problem a little more
and we have less than a minute.
Predictability.
Well, that's a good question. Again, I think it comes back to congestion and bottlenecks. It's already estimated that I forget how many billions of hours are wasted in congestion and bottlenecks across the country. We have to understand, as it relates to North Carolina and South Carolina, where are our bottlenecks now? Where is this economic activity going to increase? Where is the population going to grow? And we need to address those highways and those bottlenecks and get the funding, and hopefully we'll get some support from the folks up in Washington in addition to the tax dollars that we collect here.
David, thank you for being on the program. Good to see you. Good luck going forward.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Mark, good to see you. Lew, good to have you back.
Thank you, Chris.
Till next week, I'm Chris William. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.